Hello, welcome everybody to Inside the Designer Studio. This is a space in which we interview the people behind the scenes in the audio industry. Could be designers, could be audio personalities and reviewers in this case. And I'd like to invite you all to please subscribe to the channel and click the like button. We have interesting videos for you every week. And without further ado, first I'd like to introduce our lovely co-host, Elliot Goldman.
Good morning, Veronica. I hope you're well. We haven't seen each other since yesterday. Hopefully this time I don't have a power failure and I can participate in the interview. But thank you very much yesterday for overcoming the shortcomings of the episodes of our staff here. And we'll leave that to another day. Today I'm calm and not frazzled from that. We have a guest today that I had met briefly about a year ago at CapFest, and then we got a chance to spend a bunch of time together this year at Munich. This is a very interesting man, and so I invited him on to do an interview, and it's not, he's not a designer per se, and he doesn't own an audio company, but he is a reviewer for, I believe, the Absolute Sound. I don't know if he writes for anyone else. And we had a really interesting evening in Munich. And so I invited Alan on. And Alan, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Hi, Elliot. Hi, Veronica. Nice to see you both. Well, I've been writing reviews for the Absolute Sound for a little over 20 years now, I think. I still don't have the seniority that people like Robert Harley and Jonathan Valen, who've been doing it for a lot longer than that, have. But it's been a good run. I got into hi-fi when I was really a little kid. My father was sort of into electronics, and he built me a system when I was 5 years old. It was
Awesome.
A Jensen, as I recall, a Jensen bass reflex speaker, a Garrard turntable, and a tube amp that he built and designed. So that was my first system, and basically my history is I've spent all the money that I've ever earned since then upgrading my system. Along the way, I'm a classically trained musician, so that's piano and composition. So I performed in choruses for my whole life, so I know what real music sounds like. I constantly have that sound in my ear, in my head. That's serves as a good reference point. I also had a career, retired now, but I had a career as a marketing executive for a bunch of high-tech companies. So that's how I could, feed this habit of audiophile. And then I was just lucky enough to meet at a dealer. Actually, I met Tom Miller, who used to write for the Absolute Sound, and then at one point became the editor of the Absolute Sound. And I happened to meet him at a dealer, and we were comparing notes on some speakers we were listening to, and he just turned to me and said, "Hey, do you write, or would you like to write for me?" I was like, "Yeah, sign me up." So that's how all that got started.
That's beautiful. As an avid reader, I have always admired writers who are able to tell a story about what is being experienced. And they have a masterful use of language. So I wanted to ask you, how do you get inspiration to find the right adjectives, the right description for what you are listening, so you can inspire others to feel what you were feeling?
That's a really good question. I think, if I can say, I think a lot of reviews fall short of the the main purpose of a review is to try to give others an idea of what something sounds like.
Mhm.
And I read a lot of reviews where at the end of it, I was like, maybe I'll even think, wow, that was really well written and enjoyable to read, but I still have no idea what that component sounds like. So that's one of my goals, is to figure out how to communicate that. And the other goal is to do it in a way that's interesting and, you know, enjoyable to read. Of course, the founder of our magazine, Harry Pearson, laid the groundwork by creating a vocabulary that we can use to describe certain sounds. And interestingly, he was a photographer, so he used a lot of words that came out of the photography side of things, the visual side of things. You know, like focus, and bright, or dim or dull. And, you know, over time, all of us who've read this magazine have figured out what that means in terms of sound. You know, it's interesting, if you hand the absolute sound to someone who has not read about, you know, who's not an audiophile and hasn't read this stuff, most of the time it's gibberish to them. Not only the technical stuff, but the descriptive language that's used, it doesn't mean anything to them because they don't have the background. So you have to be an audio linguist in a way. I try to include all the audio linguistic terms that are meaningful, that are relevant to what I'm reviewing, but I also try to use very simple terms as well. I don't know. I'll tell you how. You asked me how I get the inspiration, and I just listen. And as I'm listening, it just, you know, I get some ideas about how I feel this is sounding like, or what how it's making me feel. I wrote a review. I'm sorry, I'm giving you like a really blabber.
I love it. Please
answer
continue.
to your short question. I wrote a review for a speaker. It was the Rockport Atria. And the thing that impressed me about the speaker, they did all the audiophile things right, like, you know, great imaging. You know, you could tell where all the musicians were placed, and good sound stage, nice deep sound stage. All those things were there, but that wasn't what really impressed me about the speaker. What impressed me about the speaker was that the speaker sounded like it was enjoying itself. It's so straight. The speaker just was so musical. It just sounded like, you know, I'm playing music and I'm digging it. And that like enthusiasm of how it conveyed music was contagious to anyone listening to that speaker. So I wrote about, I called it the happy speaker. And that's something that anyone can relate to. So that's, and it just, you know, it just hit me as I was listening to it.
I think you're right, Alan. As you may or may not know, Harry was my mentor, and I spent a lot of time in Seacliff. And I think Harry, besides the fact that Harry was a reporter and he liked photography, and obviously he was a musicologist, particularly in classical music, because I was a rock guy and he was a classical guy, and I introduced him to some stuff and he introduced me to a whole lot of things. And I had a lot of musical experiences with Harry and Arnie and Mike Kay and back in the day. And I've talked about that before. I don't want to go in ad nauseum, but I think you just brought up something that might be something that the magazine might want to do. And I'll explain it this way. When people ask me about the absolute sound, and a lot of people, you know, are negative towards the reviews and the press and stuff like that. And some of it's probably justified, and some of it, most of it's not. But I always say to them, you know, you should really go back and find copies of the first 20 or 30 Absolute Sound magazines and read them, and just read them for enjoyment, not read them for what they're talking about the product, because the product stuff is really outdated. It's, 40, 50 years ago. But one of the things that Harry was really good at was taking us on a journey, and it was his journey, taking us on a journey and trying to describe the musical and, more importantly, I think the emotional connection that the gear and the music was having on him. And that's one of the things that he really conveyed to me. To me, part of the review process, and I totally agree with you, a lot of times I read reviews and I have no idea what the hell the guy's talking about, and I have no connection to it. It's really well written, and there's a lot of interesting facts, most of which I could get from the internet or the literature sheet. But, how does this connect to me, the listener, and he, the writer? How do I connect all these dots together? And I talk to my customers, and I talk online about all the time. Audio isn't about pieces, it's about a system. And you're really not listening to pieces. I mean, sometimes you're listening to the difference between piece A and piece B, but that's only in the context of the system. As you know, as a review, you can't change 20 things at the same time, then you have no idea what's going on. So what I was going to suggest, and this might be an article maybe that you write or Robert wants to write or Jonathan or all of you, is why don't you just define the terms? Why don't you make a list of terms, 20, 25, 30, 50 terms, whatever they are, transparency and whatever, brightness, this soundstage, whatever the words is that you want to use to write it, and actually find a definition that all of you can kind of agree on. So those that follow the magazines and those that come to it can look at this glossary, and you can publish it in the beginning of every magazine and go, oh, that's what they're talking about. I think that would be a brilliant idea.
I think it's a great idea, Elliot. I wouldn't be surprised if material like that could be found. I don't know this for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if that could be found in Robert Harley's book, Guide to High-End Audio. But if it is, that just makes it easier, because we frequently take excerpts from that book and publish them in the magazine. If we talk about this turntable has a linear tracking tone arm, what some people won't know what that is. So we take an excerpt from the book of what a linear tracking tone arm is and put it in the magazine. Yeah. We could do that with terms that define how we're hearing things. So, and I think Robert would probably love to take on something like that. I will pass along the suggestion.
Well, excuse me, I think that, and one of the other things that was really popular when Harry was running the magazine is he had a playlist. We didn't call it a playlist back then. He had the top 50 or 100 albums, I guess, that he liked. And I think that those are things that might be able to bring more people into what you guys are doing, is if I understand what they're talking about, and they're giving me things that, particularly today with Qobuz and Tidal, that I could use to listen and compare. And between you and Robert and Jonathan and everybody else that's writing, to come to some kind of consensus of maybe a bunch of stuff that you all like to use. Doesn't have to be the same music or anything else like that. But if you took your top 20 things that you like, and Robert and whatever, and you publish that as a list, and doesn't have to be, this is the best or this is the super disc or whatever, but these are the things that we use for evaluation, and using this in conjunction with the terms, you might be able to follow us better. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I think we're partially there, Elliot, because we do, in every review, and this is kind of like laid down law for absolute sound reviewers anyway, we have to talk about music that we played through that component, and we have to cite the reference of what it was, and and that way we can talk about, here's what I heard when I played this particular piece compared to when I played this piece on some other, or my reference gear. And now, as you say, in the age of Qobuz and Tidal, people can just go and play that, go and stream that. I finally started using this playlist technology. This is slightly tangential, but You know the mobile app Shazam, where you can just hold up your phone and it listens and it tells you what you're hearing. Whenever I heard good sound in Munich, I Shazammed it. And at the end of the show, because Shazam tells you, here's all the things that you Shazammed. Now it's a verb. So at the end of the show, I had this list of everything that I had Shazammed, and I made a playlist out of that on Qobuz, and then you can make the playlist public.
Right. I saw that. I actually saw that.
So I referenced that in my Munich show report. So here's all the good sounds that were happening at the show.
I publish a playlist. I publish a playlist too, and I found that this is people always want music to listen to, and broadening our horizons is like, and this is why I talked about this on a million videos. I'm so nauseated when I go to shows and hear the same 12 pieces of music from 1980. It's like, I don't know how many pieces of music there are in the world. I have no clue. I'm sure there are billions. So why do we have to listen to the same crap? I mean, you wouldn't eat the same food every week for the rest of your life. So I think part of my job is—
Surely you still appreciate Hotel California.
Well, if I never hear it again, it'd be fine for me. But that's right. The point is that through Qobuz, I find 5-10 new pieces of music every week. I mean, and I send things out to my friends. I found, for example, I found this album yesterday called, where is it? Trio Sense is the name of the group, TRIOSENSE, and the album's called Julia. And this is just something I walked into my room and Qobuz was playing it. And then I sat down and listened to this piano-based jazz thing. And I find myself, as I've gotten older, particularly the last 2 or 3 years, listening to more instrumental stuff than I used to do in the past. But that doesn't mean I don't like vocals or classical or any of it. It's just, I find myself listening to more of this because a lot of it is really kind of cool. And I find jazz as a concept seems to be better recorded across the board than most other things generally. Okay, a lot of really good recordings. But I think that, publishing a playlist, and I think that's great. I think it's all about the music. And sometimes my point of this is that we've gotten a lot of people out there, and I'm not talking about the absolute sound, that all they want to do is compare equipment. And when they're comparing equipment, and maybe we all get into this at some point in time of our life, I found for me 30 or 40 years ago when I was doing that, I got burned out. And I really had to step back a year or two because I wasn't enjoying listening to music anymore. I was only listening for error or flaw or difference. And it's like eating food and trying to critique it. I want to enjoy the food. I don't want to just critique it. And I think that part of this has become that audiophile sense that let's A/B this and A/B that and A/B that, and they lose the emotional connection to what you're trying to do, which is try and recreate, for me anyway, recreate the illusion of people playing music for me in my home. And Harry and I used to talk about this all the time. I can't make everything sound like it's played in Carnegie Hall, but a really good audio system is a time machine. And it can take you to Carnegie Hall, or it can take you to Lincoln Center, or it can take you to the Chicago Symphony or the LA Coliseum, provided that the recording has that information on it, and it can do it. And I think that's what Harry was trying to express. And I think kind of what you're talking about also, it's that we're all looking for that emotional connection to the music. And from a press perspective, I think when they do that, it makes it interesting to read.
Well, you just put your finger on what I think is the biggest challenge of being a reviewer. So you're talking about just as an audiophile and someone in the industry, you're talking about getting away from the comparison, mindset and getting into the music appreciation mindset. Now imagine that your job is to do the comparison. So you have to listen that way, but somehow you also have to leave yourself open emotionally to the music. It's really difficult to do. I find, I think anybody would find it hard to do, to have to kind of maintain these two mindsets at the same time. But it's possible. It takes some practice.
Alan, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Alan, off cameras, you were sharing with Elliot a very interesting and actually beautiful point of view about the trade shows. And I'd like you to share what you were saying about that article that you wrote.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Just before we started recording this interview, we were bantering about trade shows and how we miss them. And I mentioned that I had written a guest editorial for the Absolute Sound called An Ode to Trade Shows. And this was in the midst of the pandemic when there hadn't been any trade shows for a couple of years. And I was really feeling it, the absence. So I wrote about I tried to think about what is it that I'm really missing? And I tried to write about all the things that you miss from a trade show. It's traveling to a new place. It's discovery, not only of new equipment, but of new music. That's a big part of it for me. But the other thing is the people. You really miss the people. It's a very tightly knit community, the audiophile community. And I'm not sure people realize that, but everybody knows each other. We're friendly competitors, or we're professional friends. You know, as a reviewer, you have this another dilemma of being a reviewer is that it's good to get to know the people that are designing this equipment, like you guys do through your show here. But you don't want to get too close, because at the end of the day, you have to write a unbiased review of what you're hearing. But still, these people are friends, what I call professional friends.
True.
And you know, I love seeing them when I go to a trade show, and I love having dinner out and talking about audio. That's where some of the best conversations, some of the best insights come from, about audio and about reviewing, because I get feedback on reviewing. So that's why trade shows are so important.
I think for me, and I think it'd be beneficial it's beneficial for me for sure, and I'm sure beneficial for you too, getting to know the person or persons behind the product. Also gives you some insights in where they come from and what they're trying to accomplish. And for those, I mean, obviously, not everybody was there, but we were having dinner in Germany, and Alan was there, and Roy Gregory, who was also a reviewer, and Sterling Trail was there, and Oliver and myself and a couple other people. But you know, one of the things that we talked about dinner is the whole systematic concept of audio. Sterling is who's been interviewed on this channel, is an incredible setup guy, and I would love to interview Roy someday, because he's really an interesting guy. And I think most of the people in the industry are intelligent and opinionated and bright, and so we talk about things that are a little different necessarily than maybe the audiophile community, because we do talk about this whole system thing, and I talk about it all the time, that because somebody can design a speaker and has that skill set, and it's a skill set I don't have, don't even know how to begin to do it, doesn't mean necessarily that they have another skill set, which is actually combining all the stuff together and making it sound great. And I think audiophiles in general kind of forget that. They're looking at the box or the piece or the gizmo, and they think that inserting that box or that gizmo creates nirvana, when in fact, if the system isn't properly configured, and I'll say this for the 8 millionth time, if the speakers aren't in the right place in the room, everything you're doing after that is trying to fix a problem. And so getting this insight and talking to people, I mean, I got involved with Gerbil from really my 3 or 4 or 5 days that I spent with Oliver, learning who Oliver was as a person and what he was trying to accomplish, before I ever really even considered whether I wanted to get involved with the product, I wanted to make sure that I was, quote unquote, marrying the right person for me, and that we at least had similar viewpoint, and went from that. So anyway, why don't we ask some of the silly questions?
Well, the first silly question is going to be out of the questions that we have there. If you had to decide, what would you do? Measure a system or write about it in an emotional way?
Oh, that's easy. Of course, I would write about it in an emotional way. I think that measurements fail to tell the whole story. I think they tell part of the story, but and in particular, they can tell you weaknesses, but they're not as good at telling you strengths of a system.
Very well said. I agree. That's really well said.
So yeah, that's an easy one. Next.
Next.
I
Elliot.
have a silly question for you, Veronica.
Okay.
Why do I see a drum set in the background?
Because I am in a recording studio.
Oh.
Yeah, and I don't play the drums, but
Don't play the drums.
I
I thought you
don't.
were going to be the next Sheila E.
No, you don't want to hear me doing that.
Well, Alan, what sound do you love?
Well, I guess that one's pretty easy for me too, because I studied piano, so I love the sound of a real piano. I love it when a system can get close to that sound. I especially love Buchendorfer pianos. They're big, rich bottom end, and so I especially love it when a system can do that. But it's not just that. The thing about a piano is that every note has a unique set of overtones that gives that note a particular character, timbre, to be technical about it. And the timbre of notes changes so radically from the bottom end of the piano all the way up to the top end where things are just tinkling, that a system that can do that is doing something special for me.
I agree.
Also, if you want to talk
about a very interesting instrument too, because when I first moved to Florida, I sponsored a series of concerts in a small venue, and they were mostly solo classical artists. And being a sponsor, I got to sit front row center, which was great, which happened to be the name of my store at the time too. But listening to a piano up close, obviously, when you hear the low frequencies of piano versus the high frequencies of piano, they come from different places too. And when you sit close to the piano, you can actually hear that. So it's one of the things, and when I listen in my system, does it do some of that as well? I'm certainly not a trained pianist, but I've spent a lot of time listening to it. And as audio got better, I appreciated the piano more and more. Early on in my audio career, listening to piano and horns, I found painful. And over the last, 20 or 25 years, the equipment has gotten a lot better, so that I now really like the sound of piano and audio, and I listen to a lot of stuff on horns as well.
And by the way, I can put in a recommendation here for a recording that gets it right. Although, unfortunately, it's a difficult recording to find because it's out of print. Wouldn't you know it? But it's a jazz group called the Michael Wolf Trio, WOL_F.
Take notes.
And the album is called 2 AM. And if you play the second track, The Conversation, and he plays a Buchendorfer as it happens. And if you play that second track, you should hear every note in its own unique, splendid way.
Beautiful.
Of coming across. Yeah, so try that. If you want to talk about sound that I love just in audiophile terms, rather than music or instrument terms. I love what I've been calling the Swiss sound, the Swiss school of audiophile, and the German school is very closely related. Speaking of Munich, but this is all equipment that has been designed by people who, in one way or another, are descendants from Goldman.
Mhm.
Many years ago. Goldman was so far ahead of its time.
He changed everything.
Yeah. And so it's all based on very wide bandwidth, very high speed electronics. And to me, what that does is it gives the wide bandwidth gives the music an openness that I love and that I hear in live music. And the speed means that it can follow the music very precisely, not just the notes, but the dynamics of the music. This equipment tends to be very dynamic, and dynamic limitations are one of the key weaknesses of subpar systems. That's almost always you hear the extension being rolled off on the top, rolled off on the bottom. That's very obvious. But then if you really listen and think about it, the next thing that you're hearing that's wrong is there's not nearly the dynamics of live music, which is incredibly dynamic.
Beautiful. Well, I'm going to cheat and I am going to shoot with two questions. One is, what sound do you hate? And the second one is, what is the most overused term or phrase in audio reviews?
Ooh. What sounds do I hate? Well, since I've been singing with choruses, live and with orchestras and all that, for many years, I have to say that I almost always hate the sound of recorded choruses.
Mm.
It's something, we're at the point now where pianos are pretty good, and you were saying this yourself, Elliot. You can get a good piano recording like that Michael Wolff one I just mentioned, and many others. You can get good orchestral recordings, although that's a bigger challenge. There's so much more involved in getting the mic placement right, and etc. But for some reason, choruses are particularly difficult to record. To me, they always sound like there's a plate of glass right above the heads of the sopranos, on the risers, and the freeness, the openness, the extension that I hear when you listen to any live chorus, I don't often hear that on a recording. So that just particularly bugs me, since I care. Some of my favorite pieces of music are choral music.
Mm. Let's make them in Dolby Atmos.
Let's see. So your other one was terms that are overused. Well, I guess when bass is being described, the word deep is used a lot.
Mm.
I feel like that's, and I guess it's okay if there's more to it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the start of the description, but if that's all there is, say bass nice and deep. That just doesn't tell you much at all about how the bass really sounds. Mm-hmm. And but yet it is commonly used. If I had more time to think about it, I could probably come up with a better answer.
Let me ask you a question, because my most abused term in audio is the word depth. And I really think that the overwhelming majority of people have no idea what Harry was talking about. And they use it as this universal thing that washes everything, and, just placing instruments behind the speaker is not what he was really talking about. And I think it's become, this is what I was talking to you about terms before. I think most of these terms, to the newer generation of people that are coming in versus the old are completely different. They don't combine at all. Okay. It's, I kind of feel like this about the whole world, that the millennials and the rest of it seem to think that the whole world started with them and nothing happened before them, but that's a whole nother decision of mine. But I just think it's the most abused word in audio because it's come so far as to be, in my opinion, meaningless. It doesn't mean anything because the definition by which I was grown up with it has been completely perverted to be something else.
Yeah, and another one, a lot of people think the term transparent is overused. And it probably is, but that's one where I feel like if it's used properly, it actually has some utility.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a pretty good analogy of a window and how clean is it, and and if it's really, really clean, you've got a transparent vehicle to what's beyond the window. And
that was Harry's definition. That's really where it came from.
Right. I know.
Talk about seeing through the window with a quad or the Infinity mid-range or whatever it was back in the day, and that I understand, and at least the way you're using it, the way other people use, I don't think so.
Your turn, Elliot.
Well, I'm looking at this, and we kind of covered some of these things, but do you have an idol or a hero or a mentor? Because these are a little different from your perspective as a reviewer as than maybe an end user or a designer in audio that has had a significant influence on you in your audio life.
I definitely do. The thing is that I don't know if his name will mean anything to anybody, to any of your viewers. But when I'll tell a story, if I may, to show how I met this person. Somewhere in I guess I was in my 20s, and I had a pretty decent system, but I wasn't hearing what I wanted to hear from LPs. I thought the sound could be more, shall we say, transparent. So I thought it had to be the cartridge, because at that point I was into hi-fi, but I wasn't into the high end of hi-fi. So I called up a bunch of audio stores around me, and I said, I think I need a new cartridge. And most of them said, sure, no problem. Come on over. We got a bunch of them. But there was one store that said, why? What are you hearing? And I described what I was hearing, and the gentleman said, I really doubt that's the cartridge. And I said, why? What do you think it is? He said, probably the turntable itself. I said, oh, that can't be. Turntables don't have a sound. All they do is spin the record. That doesn't have a sound. He said, well, come on over and I'll demonstrate to you what a turntable can do. And so I went to this high-end dealer, and I went to see a salesman. His name is Carl Schuster. And he had set up a turntable with my cartridge, the one that I owned. And he'd set up a couple of turntables with that same cartridge. And the difference, back then, Lin was the thing. And the difference between a Lin, a good Lin, Sondek, and anything else was pretty big. Unless you had a Goldman reference, which, that's a whole different category. But I was just flabbergasted. And he ushered me into the world of high-end audio and what was possible and the things that really made a difference. Now, he had worked for Peter McGrath down at Sound Components in Florida. And eventually he started what was a co-founder of a speaker company called Metaphor Acoustics. And that company made excellent speakers, but ran out of money, as you know, tends to happen.
It was Bill Pugh's company.
Exactly. And Carl Schuster and Bill Pugh are bosom buddies. And they both went to work for Goldman after that, or before that, I think. Carl has the best set of ears that I've ever encountered. He lives nearby, so when I want a second opinion on something, you know, I have the luxury of being able to invite Carl over and see what he thinks. But what really impresses me is that music is always his highest priority. So I can be sitting here thinking something sounds pretty damn good, and he'll come over and say, God, that was boring. And I'll think, you know, he's right. It is. And, you know, for a minute, the analytical side of my head had taken over, and I'd forgotten the emotional side. Carl never forgets the emotional side. Now he builds cables. He's the head of the empirical design cable company. But he definitely was my mentor. He taught me how to listen. He taught me what was important, and he's always my benchmark.
I think that's really fortunate. I mean, the fact is that I was very lucky early on, and I said it a million times, I was in the right place at the right time. You know, I was at the beginning of high end with John Dahlquist was a friend of mine. And obviously then I went to work for Lyric, and I had, you know, Arnie and Bill Johnson and Lou Johnson and Michelle Riversham, and all of those people went through Lyric. And then of course I was fortunate enough to meet Harry, who really took my education to a whole nother level. And I think that it's sad today. I really think it's sad today that, and people are going to hate me for what I'm going to say now, but I have to say it. I think there are a lot of people that are just on the wrong track, and they're looking, the quote, I think it was what Fleetwood Mac or Peter Green had said, they're searching for mysteries without any clues. And so a lot of this changing equipment misses the point. Okay, I'm not trying to say that my stuff or Veronica's stuff or your stuff is the greatest stuff in the world, because I don't believe that. I believe that audio is totally a system. A system has to work. It has to work in the room. And there's a lot of excellent gear that's being made today, a lot of it. I don't want to diminish that at all. There are a dozen great speaker companies out there as far as I'm concerned, and probably more in electronics, and digital has come such a long way. And I've kind of gone away from analog, but I'm not dismissing it. I just don't deal with it anymore. And it amazes me how much of this stuff is blown up. And when I go to some of my clients that are really into it, and I get to hear it, it's amazing, but it's the whole thing. And I think that it's a shame that some people, a lot of people, don't have this benchmark or anchor or whatever word we want to call it to start themselves out, because that's really where it comes from. If you start on the wrong path, okay, you're never going to get to the right path. It's never going to get there.
And that brings up the critical role of the dealer. If you start, that's someone who can start you on the right path, and you know, a good dealer, and keep you on the right path.
I agree, but I think that the dealer thing, I was a dealer for a long time, and we still are a dealer to some degree. And certainly there are good dealers left. I'm not saying there aren't. But what's really happened in the business is that there are large number of product collectors out there, and guys just moving boxes. And a lot of younger people came in, and you know, they're taking your review or Robert's review, and hey, see the review, you should buy this. It's 15% off, and buy the box. I don't see the amount of commitment that we used to see, you know, back in when Peter was a dealer and Mike Kay was a dealer, and some of the other things. And again, I'm not saying they aren't out there. I'm sure there are lots of really good guys out there.
They are.
But I just think we've become so diffuse, and there's so many different viewpoints and so many voices that there's so much noise that I think people miss some of it. And so we lost some of this. We talked about the shows too. People expectations are either too high or too low. The really good clients that we have that have allowed us to help them and show them. I think that there's very few clients, very few, that could not benefit greatly from having someone who is more experienced to them come to their house and just work on the positioning of the gear, not selling them anything.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a service that's highly underrated. And there are some good guys out there, Jim Smith, Sterling Trail, et cetera. And I'm sure there's plenty others for that matter. But my guide to all the people is, let's get into your room and look at your room and look at what you want to do. And that can determine what you can get. It's not just about buying those 7-foot tall, 500-pound speakers and sticking them in a room 12 by 13 on either side of a fireplace. That's really not how audio works. And
Alan, how do you see yourself in 5 years from
now? If I'm still doing what I'm doing today, I'll be very happy.
Beautiful.
This is for an audiophile and someone who loves to write, this is the best job in the world.
I believe you.
You get people wanting to send you equipment for free to try and keep for a long time in your house and play with it and play music, and then if you find a gem, you get to let people know about it and share that enthusiasm. That's that's a big rush. So if I can keep doing that, I'll be delighted. If my hearing holds out, you get older, your hearing starts to fade. If I can keep doing this, I'll be happy.
Well, let me thank you for joining us. And I'll leave my last statement is, I would love to do a show just about reviewing, okay? Not about the product, but about the process. And I think that would be a great show, and I think people would really enjoy doing it. So again, I thank you very much for your time, and thank you for joining us. I hope you had a good time, and I hope we get to do this again. Veronica, why don't you wrap us up?
Yes, everybody watching, thank you for being with us. If you like the content of this channel, please click the like button. Alan, my deepest gratitude. And Elliot, see you very soon.
Ciao, everybody.
Take care, everybody.